A spilled coffee, a surprise seat upgrade, and a stranger who trades Milan for Paris. Delilah thought this trip was for healing, not romance. But what if one clumsy moment changed everything? Before we get into the story, comment below where, in the world you're watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Philadelphia's Roosevelt High School as Delilah Green hurried through the empty hallway. At 42, she had mastered the art of balancing a stack of essays, a travel guidebook, and her morning coffee while rushing to her classroom before the bell. "Ms. Green," Principal Roberts called from his office doorway. "Got a minute?" Delilah stopped, mentally calculating if she had time for whatever problem needed solving. She always had time, that was her issue. 10 years of putting everyone else first had left little room for herself. "I just wanted to wish you a great trip," he said with a genuine smile. "First vacation in what, a decade?" 11 years, she corrected, unable to hide her excitement. "I still can't believe I'm finally going to Paris." Well deserved. Those extra tutoring sessions paid off. He glanced at the stack of papers in her arms. "Please tell me you're not taking work to France." Delilah laughed. "Final grading, I'll finish it on the plane." The school day flew by in a blur of last-minute instructions for the substitute teacher and goodbye hugs from students. By afternoon, Delilah was in a taxi headed to Philadelphia International Airport, her modest suitcase packed with practical clothes and one slightly impractical dress she'd splurged on for a nice dinner alone. Paris, she whispered to herself, still not quite believing it. Years of saving, of cancelling birthday celebrations, of tutoring on weekends instead of dating like her friends suggested. It had all led to this moment. At the airport, Delilah navigated check-in and security with nervous excitement. With 2 hours before boarding, she treated herself to a coffee and croissant at the airport lounge, flipping through her guidebook and highlighting museums she'd dreamed of visiting. "The Louvre first," she murmured, sipping her far too hot coffee. "Then Notre Dame." Gathering her things, Delilah stood and turned, not seeing the man rounding the corner in the same moment. The collision was instant. Her coffee cup crushed between them, sending hot liquid splashing across his chest. "Oh no!" she gasped, watching in horror as the dark stain spread across what was clearly an expensive suit. "I am so sorry." The man looked down at his ruined shirt with surprise. He was tall with salt and pepper hair that somehow looked both perfectly styled and casually tousled. For a moment he said nothing, and Delilah braced herself for anger. Instead, he laughed, a warm, rich sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "It's just coffee," he said, his voice deep with a slight accent she couldn't place. He dabbed at the stain with a napkin. "Besides, I was due for a wardrobe change in Milan anyway." Delilah blinked. "You're flying to Milan?" "Not anymore," he said mysteriously. "Plans changed." "Let me buy you another coffee at least," she offered, still mortified. "Or pay for dry cleaning." He shook his head. "Neither necessary, but I would enjoy the company if you have a few minutes." Something about his kind eyes made her agree. They sat at a small table near the window, watching planes take off while they talked. His name was Lucienne West. He asked about her guidebook, and she found herself sharing her long-held dream of visiting Paris. "My father always wanted to go," she explained. "He was a literature teacher too. He passed away before he could make the trip, so I'm kind of going for both of us." Lucienne listened with genuine interest, something Delilah wasn't used to from men she met. Most first conversations involved them talking about themselves non-stop. "And you?" she asked after realizing. She'd been chatting for 10 minutes. "What takes you to Europe so often?" "Business," he said simply. "Though lately I've been wondering what the point of it all is." Before she could ask what he meant, the announcement for her flight boarding came over the speakers. "That's me," she said, gathering her carry-on. "Again, I'm sorry about your suit." "I'm not," Lucienne replied with that same warm smile. "Safe travels, Delilah Green." She felt a small pang of regret as she walked away. It had been nice talking to someone who actually listened. But this trip wasn't about meeting men. It was about fulfilling a promise to herself and her father's memory. Delilah settled into the boarding line for economy class, mentally preparing for the cramped seat and long flight ahead. She was checking her boarding pass when a flight attendant approached her. "Miss Green, there you are. You've been upgraded." To first class. Delilah shook her head. There must be a mistake. I booked economy. No mistake, the attendant assured her, exchanging her boarding pass. If you'll follow me. Confused but not about to argue with good fortune, Delilah followed. Maybe the universe was finally giving her a break after all those years of putting her dreams on hold. That theory was tested when she saw who was sitting in the window seat next to her assigned spot in first class. Lucienne West, his ruined suit. Jacket was gone, replaced by a simple blue button-down shirt. He looked up from his book, Hemingway's A Movable Feast, and smiled. "We meet again," he said. "Did you do this?" Delilah asked, gesturing to the luxurious cabin around them. "Figured since you already had my attention," he said with a slight shrug. "Maybe I could borrow yours for 7 hours." Delilah hesitated. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not to high school English teachers from Philadelphia. "I was heading to Milan for a tech conference," he explained, seeming to sense her confusion. "But I changed my plans. I'm going to Paris instead." Because of me? The question came out more bluntly than she intended, because sometimes life gives you an opportunity to make a better choice. He gestured to the seat beside him. "No pressure. We can talk or you can watch movies and pretend I'm not here. Your choice." Delilah slowly sat down, not quite believing what was happening. "I don't make a habit of accepting extravagant gestures from men I just met." "Neither do I," he replied, with a smile. "Though I haven't met many men who've offered." The joke broke the tension, and Delilah found herself laughing. As the plane took off, their conversation resumed where it had left off in the airport lounge. Lucienne asked about her teaching, her students, the books she loved. Not once did he try to impress her with talk of his own accomplishments. "Why teaching?" he asked as they sipped champagne. Another first-class luxury Delilah was trying not to get used to. "I believe in possibilities," she answered honestly. "In showing kids that words have power, that stories can change how they see the world. Some of my students have never left Philadelphia. Books take them everywhere. Like Paris?" "Exactly. Somewhere over the Atlantic, as other passengers slept around them, Delilah found herself telling Lucienne things she rarely shared. About her father's battle with cancer, about putting her own dreams on hold to care for him, about the promise she'd made to live fully once he was gone. "Yet it took you 10 years to take this trip," Lucienne observed. "Life gets in the way," she said with a small shrug. "Mortgages, car payments, students who need extra help. It's easy to keep pushing your own dreams to next year. And now? Now I'm terrified I've built this up too much in my head. What if Paris isn't what I imagined?" Lucienne looked thoughtful. "What if it's better?" The question lingered between them as dawn broke outside the plane windows, painting the clouds in pink and gold. The captain announced their descent, and Delilah felt a flutter of both excitement and nervousness. "What are your plans in Paris?" she asked, suddenly realizing they'd be going their separate ways soon. "I don't have any," Lucienne admitted. This was a rather spontaneous decision. Because of spilled coffee? His eyes met hers. Because sometimes you meet someone who makes you curious about what might happen next. The plane landed smoothly at Charles de Gaulle Airport. As they waited to disembark, an uncomfortable reality settled over Delilah. This magical conversation was about to end. She'd go to her modest hotel, and Lucien would disappear into his wealthy, jet-setting life. "It was nice meeting you," she said, trying to sound casual. "Thanks for the upgrade." "Where are you staying?" he asked. "Small place in Montmartre." "Nothing." "Fancy?" Lucien nodded. "May I make a suggestion? There's a little café near the Sacré-Cœur, Le Petit Nuage. Best croissants in Paris." "I'll look for it," she promised. They parted ways at customs, Lucienne with a simple "Au revoir, Delilah Green" that sounded more like "until we meet again" than "goodbye." Delilah tried not to feel disappointed as she took a taxi to her hotel. What had she expected? That a handsome, successful man would change his entire schedule just to spend more time with her? Those things didn't happen in real life. Her hotel room was small but charming, with a tiny balcony overlooking a quiet street. After freshening up, she decided to start exploring immediately. She'd dreamed of this trip for too long to waste a single hour. The afternoon was spent wandering the streets of Montmartre, taking in the artist's square and climbing the steps to the Sacré-Cœur Basilica. The view of Paris spread before her brought tears to her eyes. "We made it, Dad," she whispered. As evening approached, her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since the plane. Remembering Lucien's suggestion, she asked directions to Le Petit Nuage. The tiny café was tucked away on a side street, its blue awning fluttering in the evening breeze. Inside, the café was warm and inviting. Delilah ordered in her rusty French and found a table by the window. She was halfway through her coffee when the door opened and a familiar figure walked in. Lucienne. He spotted her immediately, as if he knew exactly where to look. "Fancy meeting." "You here," he said, his eyes twinkling. "You knew I'd come," Delilah accused, but she couldn't help smiling. "I hoped." He gestured to the empty chair across from her. "May I?" "How did you find me?" "I didn't. I came for the croissants." He grinned. "Though I'll admit the timing wasn't entirely coincidental." As the evening light faded outside the cafe windows, Delilah found herself at a crossroads. The practical teacher in her said to thank him for the company and continue her trip as planned. The part of her that had denied herself adventure for too long wanted to see where this unexpected connection might lead. "I have a full day planned tomorrow," she said finally. "The Louvre, Notre Dame, a boat tour on the Seine." "Sounds perfect," Lucienne replied. "I usually explore alone." "Of course." He nodded, accepting her gentle rejection. Delilah took a deep breath. "But I wouldn't mind some company, if you're free." The smile that spread across Lucienne's face made her heart skip. "I just happened to clear my schedule." As they made plans to meet the next morning, Delilah couldn't shake the feeling that something important was beginning. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Paris was already more than she had imagined, and it was only day one. The Parisian morning greeted Delilah with golden sunlight streaming through her hotel window. She woke earlier than planned, nervous energy making sleep impossible. Was she really going to spend the day with a man she'd just met? A man who had changed his travel plans on a whim because of her? "This isn't like you," she told her reflection as she dressed in comfortable walking shoes and a sundress. But then, wasn't that partly why she'd come to Paris, to step outside her carefully structured life? At precisely 9 o'clock, Delilah spotted Lucienne waiting outside her hotel. He looked different today, less businessman, more casual traveler in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He held 2 paper cups. "Coffee," he said, offering her one, "though I considered dumping it on myself again for good luck." Delilah laughed, some of her nervousness fading. "1 ruined suit per trip is enough, I think." "Agreed." So, the Louvre first. They walked together through the morning streets, Lucienne matching his pace to hers. Unlike the nervous men she'd occasionally dated back home, he seemed completely comfortable with silence, letting her take in the beauty of Paris without feeling the need to fill every moment with chatter. At the Louvre, Delilah had expected to feel overwhelmed, both by the massive museum and by spending the day with a virtual stranger. Instead, Lucien's presence made everything easier. He knew his way around but let her lead, suggesting less crowded routes to the most famous pieces. "Everyone rushes to see the Mona Lisa," he explained as they navigated the corridors. "But some of the most beautiful art gets overlooked." In a quiet gallery of Renaissance paintings, Delilah found herself more captivated by Lucien's expression as he studied a particular artwork than by the painting itself. There was something gentle in his eyes that hadn't been there on the plane. "What?" he asked, catching her stare, just wondering what a tech investor sees in these old paintings. Lucienne smiled. "A reminder of what lasts. Technology is always changing, always becoming obsolete. These have endured for centuries." By midday, they had covered only a fraction of the museum. Lucienne suggested lunch at a small cafe hidden in the nearby Tuileries garden. They sat under striped umbrellas, sharing a bottle of wine and trading stories. "So how does one become a millionaire tech investor?" Delilah finally asked the question. That had been on her mind since she'd looked him up on her phone last night. She'd found articles about Lucienne West, philanthropist, tech mogul, notoriously private. The articles mentioned his success, but revealed little about the man himself. Very boringly, he answered with a self-deprecating smile. I created software in my 20s, sold the company in my 30s, and have been trying to find interesting ways to use the money ever since. And have you? Found interesting ways? His expression turned serious. I've built schools in developing countries, funded clean water projects, all good things, but I've spent the last 5 years in boardrooms and luxury hotels, moving, money from one place to another, trying to convince myself it matters. He looked at her directly. Yesterday, watching you get excited about finally seeing Paris reminded me there are simpler joys I've been missing. Delilah felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. Like what? Like spending an afternoon in a museum with no agenda. Like drinking wine in a garden with someone who doesn't want anything from me except conversation. After lunch, they visited Notre Dame, still partially under reconstruction. Standing before the massive cathedral, they were quiet for a long moment. My father would have loved this, Delilah said softly. He used to read The Hunchback of Notre Dame to his students every year. Tell me about him, Lucienne encouraged. As they walked along the Seine toward the boat dock, Delilah shared stories of her father, his passion for literature, his kindness to struggling students, the quiet dignity with which he'd faced his illness. He's the reason I became a teacher, she explained as they boarded the tour boat. He showed me that changing even one student's life makes everything worthwhile. The boat glided along the river, passing under ornate bridges and alongside historic buildings. Lucienne pointed out lesser-known landmarks, occasionally touching her shoulder or arm to direct her attention to something beautiful. Each brief contact sent a small thrill through her. How do you know Paris so well, she asked, as they stood at the rail watching the city slip by. I lived here for a year after college, he explained, before business took over my life. I was going to be a photographer. What happened? Life, opportunity, success. He said the last word with a hint of irony. I created an app that took off and suddenly I was running a company instead of taking pictures. Do you regret it? Lucienne considered the question. I've helped a lot of people with the money I've made, but there are days when I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd stayed here, lived in a tiny apartment and just taken photographs of beautiful things. As evening approached, they left the boat and wandered the left bank, browsing through bookstores. At Shakespeare and Company, Lucienne insisted on buying Delilah a vintage copy of Hemingway's A Movable Feast. Every visitor to Paris should have one, he said. Night fell and Delilah realized they'd spent the entire day together. It had been easier than she could have imagined. Talking to Lucienne felt as natural as talking to an old friend, yet there was an undeniable current of attraction running beneath their conversations. Are you hungry? He asked as they crossed back over the river. Starving, she admitted. Instead of suggesting an expensive restaurant, Lucienne led her to a tiny neighborhood bistro tucked away on a side street. The owner greeted him like an old friend, leading them to a secluded table in the corner. You've been here before, Delilah observed. Many times. It hasn't changed in 20 years. Over dinner, their conversation deepened. Lucienne asked about her life in Philadelphia, her small apartment filled with books, her close-knit group of teacher friends, her routine of Sunday morning coffee at the local bakery. It sounds peaceful, he said. It's predictable, she corrected. Sometimes too predictable. Is that why you finally took this trip? To break the pattern? Delilah twirled pasta on her fork, considering. Partly, and partly because I realized I was using my father's memory as an excuse to stay in place. He wouldn't have wanted that. What would he have wanted for you? Adventure, joy, she smiled softly. He used to say, life doesn't wait for your schedule, Delilah. You have to grab it when it passes by. Wise man. After dinner, they walked slowly back toward her hotel. The Eiffel Tower sparkled in the distance, its lights turning on just as they reached a perfect viewing spot. Perfect timing, Delilah whispered, entranced by the sight. I may have planned that, Lucienne admitted with a smile. Standing there with the tower glittering against the night sky, Delilah felt Lucien's hand find hers, his fingers laced with hers, warm and steady. She didn't pull away. Thank you for today, she said quietly. Thank you for spilling coffee on me yesterday. They both laughed, and the moment was perfect in its simplicity. At her hotel, they paused outside the entrance. Delilah knew this was where she should say goodnight, but she found herself reluctant to end the evening. "Would you like to come up for coffee?" she asked, then immediately felt her face flush. That sounded like a line from a bad movie. Lucienne smiled but shook his head. "I would love to, but I should go. You came to Paris for yourself, to fulfill a promise. I don't want to take that away from you." Delilah felt a mixture of disappointment and respect for his answer. "You're not taking anything away, you're adding to it. Still, some spaces should remain yours alone." He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "But I'd love to see you tomorrow if you're willing." "I'd like that. There's a place I want to show you, something not in the guidebooks." They made plans to meet in the morning, and Delilah watched him walk away before heading up to her room. Inside, she kicked off her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, touching the hand he had kissed. What was she doing? This wasn't like her at all, spending the day with a man she barely knew, feeling this flutter of excitement when he touched her. Back home, she was the responsible one, the planner, the teacher, who always had everything under control. Here in Paris, she was becoming someone else, someone who accepted spontaneous invitations and held hands with handsome strangers under the Eiffel Tower. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, her best friend back home. "How's Paris? Meet any handsome Frenchmen yet?" Delilah stared at the phone, wondering how to even begin explaining Lucienne. Instead, she simply replied, "Paris is magical. Tell you everything when I get back." Setting her alarm for the morning, Delilah tried to temper her expectations. Whatever was happening between her and Lucienne was probably just a vacation romance. The kind of story people treasured, but that rarely lasted beyond the trip itself. They lived completely different lives in different worlds, but as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help wondering what Lucienne wanted to show her tomorrow. Morning came with soft rain pattering against the windows, Delilah dressed in jeans and a light sweater, wondering if their plans would change. She needn't have worried. At exactly the time they'd agreed upon, Lucienne was waiting in the lobby with an umbrella and 2 cups of coffee. "Rain in Paris is still Paris," he said by way of greeting. He led her to a waiting car, opening the door for her with old-fashioned courtesy. "Where are we going?" she asked as they drove away from the city center. "Somewhere special." The car took them through neighborhoods tourists rarely saw, past markets and apartment buildings, where regular Parisians lived their lives. Finally, they stopped before an unassuming building with a weathered wooden door. "This doesn't look like a tourist attraction," Delilah observed as they got out of the car. "It's not." Lucienne produced a key and unlocked the door. "It's my apartment." Delilah hesitated at the threshold. "Your apartment? You live in Paris?" "Sometimes. I keep places in several cities for work, but this one is different." He held the door open. "You'll see why." Inside, the space was surprisingly modest, not at all what she would have expected from a millionaire. The furnishings were comfortable rather than luxurious, the walls lined with bookshelves. But what took Delilah's breath away were the photographs, covering every available wall space, black and white images of Paris through the seasons, children playing in parks, old men playing chess, lovers embracing on bridges, morning markets, rain-slicked streets, cafe scenes full of life and movement. Each photo told a story, captured a moment of genuine emotion. "These are incredible," she said, moving from one to another. "Who took them?" "I did." Lucienne's voice was quiet, almost shy. "This is what I was doing before the tech world claimed me. This is what I come back to when I need to remember who I really am." Delilah turned to him in surprise. "You're really good, like professionally good." He shrugged. "I never did it professionally, just for love." "Why show me this?" Lucienne moved to stand beside her, looking at the photographs. "Because yesterday you told me about your father, about what matters to you. I wanted to show you what matters to me." The honesty of the gesture touched Delilah deeply. This wasn't just a man showing off his apartment or trying to impress her. With his wealth, this was Lucienne sharing a part of himself that few people ever saw. "Thank you," she said simply. He smiled. "There's more. Come see." He led her up a narrow staircase to a rooftop terrace. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean. From this vantage point, they could see across the rooftops of Paris to the major landmarks in the distance. This is where I come to think, Lucienne said, to remind myself there's a world beyond boardrooms and investment portfolios. It's beautiful. They spent the morning there, Lucienne making coffee in his small kitchen, showing her albums of photographs he'd taken over the years. He told her stories of his early days in Paris, of his struggles before success found him, of the family he rarely saw because they were always asking for money. That's why I keep to myself, he explained. In my world, it's hard to know who wants to know you and who wants what you have. That sounds lonely, Delilah observed. It is. He looked at her with those kind eyes that had first caught her attention at the airport. Until someone spills coffee on you and doesn't care who you are or what you're worth. The simple truth of his words hung between them. Delilah realized that while she had been impressed by his gestures, the flight upgrade, his knowledge of Paris, what truly drew her to Lucienne was something much more basic. The way he listened when she spoke, the respect he showed for her journey, the genuine person behind the successful facade. As the afternoon approached, Lucienne suggested they walk to a nearby market to buy ingredients for lunch. Together they shopped for bread, cheese, fresh vegetables and wine, Lucienne chatting with the vendors in fluent French. Back at the apartment, they cooked together, moving around the small kitchen with surprising ease, as if they'd done this many times before. Over lunch, Delilah found herself sharing things she rarely discussed. Her fear of growing older alone, her occasional doubts about staying in teaching when the system seemed broken, her dreams of writing a novel someday. Why haven't you started? Lucienne asked. Time, fear, the usual excuses. What would your father say about that? Delilah smiled. He'd say I should stop making excuses and write the first page. Smart man, Lucienne said again. I think I would have liked him. He would have liked you too. The words slipped out before Delilah could consider their implication, that in some parallel universe, Lucienne might have met her father, might have been part of her life in Philadelphia, rather than this brief Parisian interlude. The thought both thrilled and terrified her, because this wasn't real life. In a few days, she would be back in her classroom and Lucienne would return to his world of tech investments and board meetings. Whatever was growing between them had an expiration date. Yet as the afternoon stretched into evening, and they remained talking at his kitchen table, Delilah couldn't help but wonder if some connections were strong enough to transcend circumstances. And, somewhere in her practical teacher's heart, a small spark of hope began to glow. The next few days passed in a dreamy blur for Delilah. Each morning, Lucienne would meet her at her hotel with coffee and a new plan for the day. Each evening they would linger over dinner, reluctant to part ways. They explored Paris together, not as tourist and guide, but as two people discovering the city through each other's eyes. Lucienne showed her hidden courtyards and secret gardens, tucked behind imposing facades. Delilah dragged him to every bookstore they passed, her excitement at finding first editions of classics making him smile. On their fourth day together, they visited Montmartre again, wandering through the artists' square where painters captured tourists on canvas. An older artist with a weathered face and kind eyes called out to them in broken English, "You beautiful couple. I paint you, yes? Memory of Paris forever." Delilah started to decline. She wasn't one for tourist gimmicks, but Lucienne placed a gentle hand on her back. "Why not?" he said. "A souvenir better than any postcard." They sat on simple wooden stools while the artist worked, his brush moving quickly across the canvas. Lucienne kept his arm around Delilah's shoulders, and she leaned into him without thinking, the gesture as natural as breathing. "How long you married?" the artist asked as he painted. Delilah opened her mouth to correct him, but Lucienne spoke first. "We're not," he said simply. "Just very lucky to have met." The artist nodded wisely. "Ah, new love. Even better to paint," the eyes still full of surprise. When the portrait was finished, Delilah was stunned by how the simple painting had captured something true. Not just their faces, but the connection between them. The way Lucienne looked at her with warmth and wonder. The way she smiled, more freely than she had in years. "It's perfect," she whispered, touching the canvas gently. Lucienne paid the artist generously, and they continued their walk, the portrait carefully wrapped and tucked under his arm. "Where will you hang it?" Delilah asked, trying to keep her tone. "Light, somewhere I'll see it every day," he answered. The simple statement hung between them, full of implications neither was ready to address. What happened when her vacation ended? When she returned to Philadelphia and her classroom? When he resumed his life of business meetings and international flights? That evening, Lucienne took her to a small jazz club where a trio played old standards. They sat at a tiny table, knees touching beneath the tablecloth, sipping wine and letting the music fill the spaces between words. "My father loved jazz," Delilah said during a break between songs. "He had an old record player and vinyl albums. He'd play on Sunday mornings. Mom would make pancakes and we'd all sit around listening to Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong. Sounds like a perfect childhood," Lucienne remarked. "It was, until we lost Mom. Car accident when I was 15. Lucienne covered her hand with his. "I'm sorry. It's why Dad and I were so close. We helped each other through it." She turned her hand to lace her fingers with his. "What about your family?" Lucienne's expression turned reflective. "Mother died when I was young. Father remarried, had 2 more children. We were never close. He was disappointed I didn't want to join the family business, banking. But you made your own success." "Yes, and when the money came, suddenly everyone wanted to be close to me." He sipped his wine. "It's been a long time since I've trusted anyone the way you trusted your father." The band returned, starting a slow, romantic number. Without a word, Lucienne stood and offered his hand. Delilah rose and followed him to the small dance floor, where a few other couples swayed to the music. In his arms she felt both safe and exhilarated. His hand on her waist was gentle but sure. As they moved together, Delilah let her head rest. Against his shoulder, breathing in his scent, clean cotton, subtle cologne, and something uniquely him. "Delilah," he said, his voice low near her ear. "When do you go back to Philadelphia?" The question she'd been avoiding. 3 days. His arms tightened slightly around her. "That's not much time." "No." They continued dancing, neither speaking the thoughts that filled their minds. When the song ended, they returned to their table, the mood between them shifting from carefree to something more charged with emotion. "What are we doing, Lucienne?" Delilah finally asked. He looked at her steadily. "I'm falling for you." The directness of his answer took her breath away. No games, no hesitation. "This can't work," she said, though her heart argued otherwise. "We live completely different lives. You're always traveling, running companies. I have a classroom full of teenagers waiting for me in Philadelphia." "Those are logistics," Lucienne replied. "They can be solved." "It's not that simple." "It can be." He leaned forward. "What are you afraid of, Delilah?" The question hit home. What was she afraid of? Being hurt, disappointed? Or was it something deeper? The fear that if she opened her heart fully, the loss would be unbearable when it ended. "I'm afraid of building something that can't last," she admitted. "I'm not naive enough to think a few magical days in Paris mean anything in the real world. What if I told you I haven't felt this way about anyone in years? That meeting you has made me question everything about how I've been living." I'd say that's what vacation romances do. They feel intense because they exist outside real life. Lucienne looked disappointed. "Is that all this is to you?" "A vacation romance," Delilah sighed. "I don't know what this is. I just know that in 3 days I'll be back in my classroom and you'll be wherever it is you need to be." "And if I said I'd come to Philadelphia?" Her heart skipped. "What? What if I came to see you? Spent time in your world, not just showing you mine? You would do that?" In a heartbeat. The band began another song and conversations around them grew louder. Lucienne signaled for the check, sensing they needed a quieter place to talk. Outside, the night air was cool. They walked along the Seine, the lights of the city reflected in the dark water. Lucienne stopped at a bench overlooking the river and motioned for her to sit. "I need to tell you something," he said, his expression serious. "About why I changed my plans that day at the airport." Delilah waited, suddenly nervous. "When you bumped into me and spilled that coffee, I was on my way to close a deal in Milan, a big acquisition, another tech company to add to my portfolio. More money, more responsibility." He took her hand. "And I was dreading it. I've been doing the same thing for 15 years, adding to a fortune I don't need. running businesses that don't fulfill me. And then you looked at me with those excited eyes, talking about finally going to Paris after all these years of waiting, and something just clicked. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I felt that kind of genuine excitement about anything. So you abandoned a multi-million-dollar deal to follow a stranger to Paris? Delilah was incredulous. Yes, he laughed. My assistant thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But sitting next to you on that flight, hearing you talk about your students, your father, the books you love, I felt more alive than I had in years. Delilah didn't know what to say. The idea that she had inspired such a dramatic change in his plans seemed absurd, yet the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. The deal can wait, Lucienne continued, or not happen at all. I'm beginning to realize there are more important things than adding another company to my portfolio. Like what? Like figuring out what actually makes me happy. Like rediscovering. The person I was before success changed everything. He squeezed her hand. Like seeing where this connection between us might lead. Delilah looked out at the river, buying time to sort through her thoughts. It would be so easy to get swept away by his words, by the romance of it all. But she prided herself on being practical, on thinking things through. Lucienne, I'm flattered, truly. But we've known each other for less than a week. What you're describing sounds like you're having some kind of life crisis and I just happened to be there when it hit. He considered her words. You're partly right. I have been questioning my life choices, but you weren't just there. You were exactly what I needed to see clearly. Someone genuine, passionate about what they do, connected to what matters. And what happens when the novelty wears off? When you realize that dating a high school English teacher means dealing with her grading papers on weekends and living on a budget that doesn't include spontaneous trips to Paris? I'd welcome it, he said without hesitation. You think I care? About money, I have more than I'll ever need. What I don't have is someone who sees beyond it, someone who dumped coffee on me and was worried about my suit, not about who I was or what I could do for her. His words touched something deep in Delilah. She'd spent so many years being responsible, practical, planning every detail of her life, until this trip, until Lucienne. I'm scared, she admitted. Not just of getting hurt, but of wanting something I can't have. What do you want, Delilah? Beyond the next few days, beyond practical considerations, what does your heart want? The question hung between them, and for once Delilah didn't overthink her answer. You, she said simply. I want to see if this is real, or if it's just Paris. Making us both a little crazy. Lucienne smiled, relief evident in his eyes. That's all I'm asking for, a chance to find out. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Delilah didn't want to pull away. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. His hand came up to cup her face, and she felt herself melting into the moment, all her carefully constructed walls crumbling. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Lucienne rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since you spilled coffee on me, he admitted. Delilah laughed softly. I've been wondering if you would since that first dinner. They stayed by the river for hours, talking about possibilities, about fears, about what might come next. No promises were made, but a door had been opened that neither wanted to close. 2 more days, Lucienne said as he walked her back to her hotel. Let's make them count. And then? And then I'll come to Philadelphia. I'll meet your students, see your world. We'll figure it out one step at a time. At her hotel door, they kissed again, longer this time, with the promise of more to come. Good night, Delilah Green, Lucienne said, his voice husky. Good night, Lucienne West. Inside her room, Delilah leaned against the closed door, her fingers touching her lips where his had been. Was she being foolish? Probably. Was she setting herself up for heartbreak? Possibly. But for the first time in years, she was following her heart instead of her carefully plotted plan. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lucienne. Tomorrow, pack an overnight bag. I want to show you something outside the city. Delilah typed back, more surprises? His reply came immediately. Life is full of them. Some even involve spilled coffee. The next morning, Lucienne arrived with his now customary coffee and a small car instead of his usual driver. "I thought we'd take a drive ourselves today," he explained as he held the door for her. They drove out of Paris, through rolling countryside dotted with small villages and vineyards. Lucienne pointed out landmarks along the way, telling stories of his early days in France when he'd explored on an old motorcycle. "Where are we going?" Delilah finally asked, as they turned onto a narrow road lined with ancient trees. "A place that's special to me. I've never brought anyone else here." After another 20 minutes of driving, they arrived at a small stone cottage nestled among vineyards. Wildflowers grew along the walkway, and ivy climbed the weathered walls. "What is this place?" Delilah asked as they got out of the car. "My sanctuary," Lucienne answered, retrieving their bags from the trunk. "I bought it 10 years ago when I needed somewhere to escape to. No internet, no phone signal, just peace." He unlocked the door and led her inside. The interior was rustic, but comfortable. Exposed wooden beams, a stone fireplace, simple furniture. The windows overlooked rolling hills of grapevines. "It's beautiful," Delilah said, taking in the quiet charm of the place. "I come here when I need to remember what's real," Lucienne explained, setting down their bags. "The last few years, I haven't had much time for reality." They spent the afternoon exploring the property, walking through the small vineyard, picking fresh vegetables from the garden for dinner, sitting on the stone patio as the sun began to set over the hills. As darkness fell, Lucienne built a fire in the fireplace while Delilah prepared a simple meal in the tiny kitchen. They ate at a rough wooden table with candles providing the only light besides the fire's glow. "I could get used to this," Delilah said, looking around the cozy room. "To what part?" Lucienne asked. "All of it. The quiet. The simplicity." She met, his eyes across the table. The company. After dinner, they sat before the fire with glasses of local wine. Lucienne put his arm around her, and she nestled against him, feeling utterly content. "When I'm in board meetings," he said quietly, "this is where my mind wanders. Not to the luxury apartments or the yachts or any of the things people think money should buy. Just here. Simple. Real. Why don't you live here all the time? Do what makes you happy." He sighed. "Responsibility. Employees who depend on me. Projects. I believe in that need funding. It's not as simple as walking away, but it could be someday." "Yes," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Someday." The word held promise, and Delilah let herself believe, just for tonight, that someday might include her. Later, as they lay in the cottage's small bedroom, moonlight streaming through the windows, Lucienne held her close, his heartbeat steady under her cheek. "Delilah," he whispered. "Yes. I'm glad you spilled that coffee." She smiled in the darkness. "So am I." Morning came with birdsong and sunlight. They lingered over breakfast on the patio, neither eager to return to the city and the reality that Delilah's departure was drawing near. "One more day," Lucienne said as they reluctantly packed the car. "Let's make every hour count." They drove back to Paris slowly, stopping in small towns along the way. In one village, they found an antique bookstore where Lucienne insisted on buying Delilah a rare edition of poetry for her classroom. "My students will love it," she said, carefully wrapping the book. "I want to meet them," Lucienne replied. "Your warriors of literature, as you called them." The thought of Lucienne in her classroom, meeting her students, existing in her everyday world, it made everything suddenly feel more possible. Back in Paris, they spent their final evening at Lucienne's apartment. He cooked for her, a skill he admitted he rarely used anymore. They sat on his rooftop terrace as the sun set, the city spread before them in a tapestry of lights. "I have something for you," Lucienne said, reaching into his pocket. He handed her a small box. Delilah opened it carefully to find a delicate silver key on a chain. "What's this?" she asked. "A key to the cottage," he explained. "I want you to have it, to use whenever you want, whether I'm there or not. A place to write that novel you talked about." The gesture touched her deeply. It wasn't just a gift, it was a tangible connection, a thread between them that would stretch across the ocean. "Thank you," she said, voice thick with emotion. He helped her fasten the necklace, his fingers warm against her skin. When she turned to face him, his eyes held a question. "Stay with me tonight," he said softly. "Please." Delilah nodded, no hesitation this time. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight belonged to them. In the morning, reality intruded. Delilah's flight was at noon. Lucienne insisted on driving her to the airport himself, both of them quiet, lost in thoughts of what came next. At the departures area, they stood facing each other, reluctant to say goodbye. "I'll be in Philadelphia in 2 weeks," Lucienne promised. "I've already arranged it." 2 weeks feels like forever, Delilah admitted. "It's nothing compared to how long you waited for Paris." He smiled, though his eyes were sad. "And this time, you're not waiting alone." Their final kiss was bittersweet, an ending and a beginning wrapped together. As Delilah walked toward security, she turned back once to see Lucienne still watching, his tall figure standing apart from the crowd. 2 weeks, she mouthed. He nodded, and she forced herself to turn away, moving forward into whatever came next. On the plane, Delilah touched the key that hung around her neck. Paris had given her more than she ever expected. Not just the fulfillment of an old promise to her father, but the possibility of a new future she hadn't dared to imagine. As the city disappeared beneath the clouds, Delilah opened her journal and began to write. The first page of her novel, perhaps, or simply the next chapter of her own story. The familiar skyline of Philadelphia greeted Delilah as her plane descended. After the magic of Paris, the city looked both comfortingly familiar and strangely different, as if she was seeing it through new eyes. Sarah was waiting at arrivals, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "There she is, the world traveler." Sarah engulfed her in a hug. "You look different. Did Paris change you? Or is there something you haven't told me?" Delilah smiled, not ready to share everything about Lucienne just yet. "Paris was transformative. Details. I need all the details," Sarah insisted as they walked to her car. "Was the Eiffel Tower as romantic as they say? Did you try escargot? Did you have a torrid affair with a sexy Frenchman?" At the last question, Delilah felt her cheeks warm. Sarah stopped walking. "Oh my God, you did, didn't you? You met someone." "He's not French," Delilah said, unable to keep the smile from spreading across her face. "But yes, I met someone. I knew it. Get in the car right now and tell me everything." On the drive home, Delilah shared the story, the coffee spill, the changed flight, the days exploring Paris together. She left out some of the more intimate details, the depth of what she was feeling, the key to the cottage that now hung beneath her blouse. "So he's coming here? To Philadelphia?" Sarah asked, clearly skeptical. "A millionaire tech guy is going to show up at Roosevelt High School in 2 weeks?" "That's what he said. And you believe him?" Delilah hesitated. In Paris, surrounded by the magic of the city and Lucienne's presence, everything had seemed possible. Back in Philadelphia, doubt began to creep in. What if Sarah was right? What if it had all been just a vacation romance, beautiful but temporary? "I want to believe him," she finally answered. Sarah's expression softened. "Well, I hope he proves me wrong. You deserve something wonderful, Del." Home looked smaller than Delilah remembered. Her apartment, once her comfortable sanctuary, now felt confining after the expansiveness of her time in Paris. She unpacked slowly, each item bringing back memories, the book of poetry Lucienne had bought her, the painting from the artist in Montmartre, the key around her neck. Her phone chimed with a message. Landed safely. Just seeing Lucien's name on the screen made her heart race. She typed back, "Safe and sound. Paris already feels like a dream." His reply came immediately. "Not a dream. I'm looking at our portrait right now, 13 days until Philadelphia." She smiled, hope rekindling. Maybe Sarah was wrong. Maybe this was real. The return to school was both harder and easier than Delilah had anticipated. Harder because her mind kept drifting to Paris, to Lucienne. Easier because she felt renewed energy for teaching, for connecting with her students. "Ms. Green, you're different," Zach, one of her seniors, observed during class. "You seem happier." "Paris will do that to a person," she replied with a smile. The days passed in a blur of lesson plans, grading, and text messages from Lucienne. He sent photos of his meetings, of the books he was reading, of sunsets from whatever city he happened to be in. She sent pictures of her classroom, of the funny things her students wrote, of her favorite reading spot in her apartment. Each night they talked on the phone, sometimes for hours, sharing the details of their days, deepening what had begun in Paris. Despite the distance, Delilah felt him becoming more real, not less. A person with flaws and struggles, not just the romantic figure from their Parisian adventure. "The board wants me to consider another acquisition," he told her one night, sounding tired. "A company in Seattle." "And what do you want?" she asked. There was a pause. "I want to be sitting on that cottage patio with you, watching the sun set. Over the vineyard. I want simple." The longing in his voice matched her own. 11 more days, she reminded him. As the date of his arrival grew closer, Delilah found herself both excited and nervous. What if the connection they felt didn't translate to her world? What if he took one look at her modest life and realized the gap between them was too wide? 9 days before his scheduled arrival, Delilah was in the middle of teaching when her classroom door opened. Principal Roberts poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt, Miss Green, you have a visitor." Delilah's heart leaped to her throat. It couldn't be, but it was. Lucienne stood in the doorway, looking both out of place and perfectly at ease in his casual clothes, jeans and a simple sweater, not the businessman's attire she'd first seen him in. "Surprise," he said, his eyes finding hers across the classroom. 28 teenage faces swiveled from him to her and back again, instantly sensing the electric current between them. "Class," Delilah said, finding her voice despite her shock. "Please continue reading the passage while I step outside for a moment." In the hallway, she couldn't decide whether to hug him or scold him. "You're early, you said 2 weeks." "I couldn't wait." His smile was both apologetic and delighted. "Forgive me?" Instead of answering, she pulled him into a quick hug, breathing in the now familiar scent of him. "What are you doing here at my school?" "I thought I'd offer my services." "Guest lecturer, perhaps? I hear you're covering The Great Gatsby this semester." "I might have some insights on the corrupting influence of wealth," Delilah laughed. "You're serious?" "Completely. I'd like to meet your warriors of literature." The rest of the day was surreal. Lucienne sat in the back of her classroom, watching her teach with obvious admiration. When she invited him to share his thoughts on Fitzgerald's critique of the American dream, he spoke with eloquence, but also humility, connecting with the students in a way that surprised her. After school, he waited while she gathered her things, drawing curious glances from other teachers. "You've caused quite a stir," she told him, as they walked to the parking lot. "Sarah Jones from math already texted me asking who the hot guy in my classroom was. Should I be flattered or worried about competition?" Delilah laughed. "Definitely flattered. Sarah's been happily married for 20 years. In the parking lot, Lucienne spotted her aging Volvo and smiled. "I was wondering what you drove." "Not quite a Ferrari," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "I prefer it," he said sincerely. "It suits you. Reliable, unpretentious, built to last." The simple compliment eased some of her anxiety. Maybe he really did see value in her world. "Where are you staying?" she asked as they reached her car. "The Warwick Hotel downtown. But I was hoping you might show me your Philadelphia first. The real places, not the tourist spots." Delilah smiled. "I'd like that." They spent the evening exploring her neighborhood, the small bakery where she bought Sunday morning coffee, the park where she read on warm days, the community center where she volunteered teaching literacy classes. Over dinner at her favorite local restaurant, a far cry from the Parisian bistros they'd enjoyed, Lucienne seemed genuinely interested in everything she showed him, asking questions about her routine, her friends, her life before they met. "So this is your world," he said as they walked back to her apartment building. "Disappointed?" she couldn't help asking. "The opposite. It's real, Delilah. Do you know how rare that is in my life? How valuable?" At her door, she hesitated, then invited him in. Her apartment felt small and cluttered compared to his Paris homes, but Lucienne moved through the space with appreciation, examining her overcrowded bookshelves, the stack of student papers on her dining table, the framed photos of her with her father. "It's very you," he said, picking up a well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird from her coffee table. Is that good or bad? It's perfect. He stayed late into the night, talking, laughing, sharing stories they hadn't had time for in Paris. When he finally left with a lingering kiss at her door, Delilah felt as if her two worlds were beginning to merge, the magic of Paris and the reality of Philadelphia finding common ground in Lucien's presence. Over the next week, Lucien integrated himself into her life with surprising ease. He joined her for coffee before school, sat in on her classes, helped her grade essays in the evening. He met Sarah for dinner and charmed her skeptical friend into reluctant approval. "Okay, so he's not what I expected," Sarah admitted afterward. "He actually seems to care about you, not just the idea of you." "That's what makes him different," Delilah agreed. On Saturday, Lucien surprised her with tickets to the Philadelphia Orchestra, not in the expensive box seats, but in her favorite section at the back of the hall where the acoustics were best. Afterward, they walked along the Schuylkill River, the city lights reflecting in the water. "What happens next?" Delilah finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "You can't stay in Philadelphia forever. You have companies to run, meetings to attend." Lucien was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that a lot, and I've realized something important. The past 10 days, following your schedule, helping in your classroom, eating at your favorite places, I've been happier than I've been in years." "Because it's new," Delilah said practically. "Everything feels exciting at first." "No." He stopped, walking, and turned to face her. "Because it's meaningful. Do you know what I did yesterday while you were teaching your advanced class? I used your desk to review acquisition papers for a company I don't care about, and I realized I couldn't remember why any of it mattered." "Your work matters," Delilah insisted. "You've built something important." "Parts of it matter," he agreed. "The foundation that builds schools, the investments in clean energy, but the endless cycle of buying companies just to make more money to buy more companies, that stopped mattering. A long time ago. I just didn't have a reason to admit it until now." "Until me?" She raised an eyebrow. "Until you reminded me there are other ways to measure success." He took her hands in his. "I've made a decision. I'm restructuring my companies, stepping back from day-to-day operations, focusing only on the parts that make a difference." "That's a big change. Are you sure?" "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time." His eyes were steady on hers. "I'm not saying I'll never travel for business again. There are responsibilities I can't walk away from entirely, but I can change how I live, where I spend my time." "And where is that?" "Wherever you are, at least part of the time." He smiled. "I happen to know there's a decent university here where I could teach a business ethics course, and a cottage in France where a certain English teacher might like to spend her summers writing." The scenario he painted sounded like a dream, the best of both worlds, a life together that respected both their passions. "It sounds wonderful," she said, "but also terrifying. We've only known each other a few weeks." "Sometimes a few weeks tells you more than years of careful dating." "My father would have said the same thing," Delilah admitted. "He proposed to my mother after 3 weeks." "Smart man. Are you proposing?" she asked, only half joking. Lucienne laughed. "Not yet. I think we both need a little more time. But I am proposing possibility, a future worth exploring together." They continued walking, making plans, imagining how their lives might intertwine. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be challenges, compromises, difficult conversations ahead. But for the first time, Delilah allowed herself to believe that what had begun with spilled coffee might end with something lasting. The next morning, Lucienne arrived at her apartment early. When she opened the door, he was holding something behind his back. "What's that?" she asked. With a theatrical flourish, he produced a cup of coffee, the same brand from the airport where they'd first met. "I thought we should commemorate the moment," he said, offering it to her. Delilah took the cup, laughing. "Should I spill it on you for good luck?" "I was hoping you'd spill it on the title deed instead." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "To the cottage in France. I've had it put in both our names." Delilah stared at the envelope, overwhelmed. "Lucien, that's too much." "I can't accept." "You already did," he reminded her gently, touching the key that hung around her neck. "This just makes it official. The place where we can both be ourselves, away from everything else. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come there with me whenever we can. Say you'll write your novel on that patio. Say you'll let me take photographs while you work. Yes to all of it. The coffee remained unspilled as they sealed this new promise with a kiss. Later, they would return to their routines. Delilah to her classroom, Lucienne to the restructuring of his business empire. There would be weekends in Philadelphia and holidays in Paris, phone calls across time zones and quiet evenings in the French countryside. It wouldn't always be easy, but as Delilah stood in her apartment holding both coffee and future in her hands, she knew that sometimes the most unexpected connections were the ones worth fighting for. 6 months later, Delilah stood on the cottage patio, watching the sunset over the vineyard. Her laptop was open on the table, the first 3 chapters of her novel complete. Inside, Lucienne was preparing dinner, having returned that morning from a business trip to London. How's the writing? He called through the open door. Almost finished. For the day, she replied. How was your meeting? Productive. The foundation is funding 10 new schools in Kenya. He joined her on the patio, placing a glass of wine beside her computer. What chapter are you on? The one where she spills coffee. On him, Delilah said with a smile. The best part of the story. The beginning of it, anyway. Lucienne leaned down to kiss her. I prefer the middle, and I'm looking forward to the rest. As darkness fell over the vineyard, they sat together in comfortable silence. Delilah writing, Lucienne sorting through photographs. 2 people from different worlds who had found in each other the perfect aisle seat for the journey ahead. In Philadelphia, her classroom waited. In Paris, his apartment stood ready. And here, in this simple cottage, they had created something that belonged only to them, a place where coffee stains led to lasting connections and chance meetings became chosen futures. The night deepened around them, but neither moved to go inside. Some moments were worth savoring, like the last sip of perfectly brewed coffee, or the final page of a beloved book, or the steady presence of someone who had seen your true self across a crowded airport lounge and decided, against all logic, to change course. I love you, Lucienne said simply. I love you too, Delilah replied, and in the end, that was the story. Not of Paris or Philadelphia, not of wealth or modest means, but of 2 people who had found, in each other, a home worth returning to, again and again and again, the end.